Welcome, my name is Terry Southall and I run Southall Training. Now, we're a personal development organisation that trains people in personal development and helps them with their careers. We do staff selection, we do talks at conferences and in-house training, restructuring sales department, anything to do with personnel. That's our area of speciality. Now, what I'm going to do is show you in about the next 45 minutes about profile and how psychologically you're made up as a person. It's going to take me that long to just skim over it. So I pre-warn you that it's going to go for that amount of time. I'm told by so many people that young people just can't watch anything over 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. Well, if that's you, well, I suggest you turn it off now. But if you can stay with it, I think you're going to learn some very valuable skills that'll help you with your life and your career and your relationships. Who's the program for? Well, it's for young people who are at school trying to work out what they want to do for a living. It's someone who may have left school or college and who are currently working and aren't happy with where they are and what they're doing, and they want to look at changing. It's for people who are working inside an organisation who want promotion and trying to work out what direction to go in or redirect their career as well. And for organisations that are having problems with their corporate culture, with their sales operations, their recruitment, it's going to give you skills how to fix that up. And finally, we all seek a relationship in life, and picking the right partner is very, very important. To assess who you're going out with, whether this is going to work long term, is not a bad idea. Because too many times people go into relationships and they just don't work and they end in tears. So it's best to understand it early and bring it to an end before it becomes a mess. Now, I'm going to now go across and show you a profile. Many of you will know it as the Myers-Briggs system. Many of you will have done it, and many of you won't. It's a very valuable thing if it's learnt properly. Unfortunately, most people don't learn it properly. They attend a program which runs for half a day or whatever, and it can't be learnt in that amount of time. It takes time. That's why I devote 10 weeks of my program to teach it to you properly. I do other things in the program as well, but I keep visiting it again and again because there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of little things to learn. When you finish the program that I do, you're able to read a profile of a person in about 1 second. You can do that either on a telephone, having never met them. You can do it by a photograph. I mean, there are better ways of doing it, but you have to, you can. And finally, you can do it by the way they walk. It's a very powerful skill. You don't have people fill forms out. So it's a very powerful system, the one I use. We come in 4 types. The first one is the analytical. They tend to be dull, colourless and boring, orderly, correct, fastidious, proper, attention to detail, slow decision makers, base decisions in their life on facts. The second one, the amiable, number 2, they tend to be very friendly, easygoing, supportive, procrastinate a lot, find decision making very difficult, very nice people. Third type is the autocrat, number 3. They tend to be hard to get to know, independent, narrow-minded, arrogant, basically smash their way through situations in life. And finally, number 4, down here, the expressive, they tend to be very friendly, easygoing, fun-loving, inspirational, motivational people, ideas people, very creative, but very poor time planners, poor time control. I'd like you to make a selection as to where you feel you lie. Are you the number 1, the nitpicking analytic, the nicely amiable, the autocrat, or the open, happy, expressive? Now, after you've made that selection, I want you to then make a second choice. I'll put the second sheet here. Now, if I had a rubber band here and I was to stretch it like that and then let it go, it'll come back to where it came from, always. Unless, of course, I break it. But if you don't stretch it too far, you won't break it. Again, I'll stretch it out here and then it'll go back to where it came from. Personality profiling is exactly the same. If you are an analytical and you role shift, you'll either go across to the autocrat number 3 or down to number 2, the analytical, the amiable. If you're the amiable, you'll either go up to the analytical or across to number 4, the expressive. If you're the 3, the autocrat, you'll go across to number 1 or down to number 4. And finally, if you're the expressive, you'll move to either number 3, the autocrat, or across to the amiable, number 2. So make a selection of you've done the first selection of your major profile. Now you've picked your second one. Now, what I want you to do now is work out who annoys you the quickest of the four of them. So if your major profile is number 1, it's either number 2, the amiable, the 3, the autocratic, or the 4, the expressive. Who annoys you second most? If you're the amiable, it's either the analytical, the autocrat number 3, or the expressive number 4. If you're the autocrat number 3, it's either number 1, the analytical, number 2, the amiable, or number 4, the expressive. And finally, if you're the expressive number 4, who annoys you the quickest is the 3, the autocrat, number 1, the analytical, or 2, the amiable. It's one of the ones that will annoy you second most. Now, when you've filled that out, by the way, you'll find that, as I've got a sheet here now, if your major profile is analytical, the person who will annoy you the quickest is, in fact, number 4, the expressive. He lies directly opposite you. If you're the expressive number 4, the one who annoys you the most will be the analytical. You find them a pain in the butt as you view it. If you are the 3, the autocrat, then the amiable will get to you. And if you are the amiable, then the autocratic will get to you. Number 3. Now, when you move your role shift into the other part of your profile, then again it's the one who's directly opposite that profile is the one who will annoy you the most. So again, if you're the analytical and you move across to autocrat, as you're role shifting, that's when number 2 will annoy you. And so it goes. So if you're number 2 and you move across to expressive number 4, then number 1, analytical, will annoy you. Or if you go to analytical from amiable, then the expressive will annoy you. So it's how it works. It doesn't happen any other way. Now, I'm not going to go into that any further. As I say, it takes a long time to learn it. I've just given you a bit of an idea. Now, why is it of some use to you? Well, it's a lot of use to you. If you are an analytical person, then something like accountancy or somewhere where you can use those analytical skills are going to be the best career choice for you. If you're the amiable, somewhere where you can be in a help and support role. That's why you see many people join the public service as public servants. The autocrat, they quite often go into security, police force, and places like that. That they like to, or in running companies, they like to be there where they can be in charge. That's how their mind works. The expressive, on the other hand, they're loose and friendly. A lot of them like sales, and somewhere where they can be free and easy and not tied down too much. If they're an area where they have to do a lot of detailed analytical work, they can be found wanting. Now, in life, it's quite cruel. If in an organisation, if you've got an analytical in charge, they can start paper warfare and email warfare. They can be quite a nuisance. Yet they can be very powerful, but providing they're kept in their place. Same with the expressive. They can be very the motivator and get out there and make things happen, but don't expect them to do a lot of planning. And the autocrat, well, they can be very powerful leaders, do some great things, but if they're just let to go loose, they can become quite a nuisance. You'll see them in churches, sporting groups. They can form groups, which I'll talk about later, but they can be very damaging. Now, profile set from birth, and so is what's called the A and B personality, and you need to know this. The A personality is very fast-paced, and the B is very slow-paced. Now, it's pure psychology. I'm going to show you a psychology form. It's a form you fill out. It goes from 0 to 140 as to what your A and B profile is. To give you an idea, the A personality is very fast-paced, and the B, you basically can't hurry them if you try. On this form, it says you're not very competitive, which is a low score, or 7, which is a very high score. You listen well, let others finish speaking. That's the B and a low score. A high score, you should not interrupt and finish the sentences for them. You're not competitive is the B, and you're highly competitive for the A. That's how it goes. Now, on that score sheet there, you can get a score between 0 and 140. If you're 85 and above, then you're what's considered to be the A personality. If you're below that, you're the B. Now, there's no right or wrong in this. A really slow B is not going to produce much activity for you. so you're not going to get much out of them. The high A can rush around in 10 different directions at once and make a lot of mistakes. So by being an A doesn't mean you're better than a B or whatever. Around the 85 area seems to be quite good, where the person puts a fair amount of vigour into what they're doing, yet they don't spin their wheels and make mistakes. Now, a couple of good analogies would be the jet ski and a little fishing boat. Out on the water, you can see the jet ski racing around in circles over its own waves and making a lot of noise and a lot of drama, really for nothing. On the other hand, down the other end of the waterway, you can see a little fishing boat with a small engine in it, and the fisherman goes out to where he wants to fish, and you hear it going putt, 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 putt. It'll get out there very slowly, but it will get there. It will outlast probably 100 jet skis. It'll still be going when they're all in the tip. Same with a good example would be a Formula One racing engine. They scream, put out a lot of horsepower and activity, and they go for about 3 or 4 races, and then it's all over. Once again, they're on the scrap heap as well. They've finished their lifespan. So with the A and B personality, if you're a very high A, then it's going to be very beneficial for you to slow down some for your own well-being. Psychologists call it the hurry sickness. Now, just finally, where you can find it of use, in Australia there's a football league called the AFL. Now, they have a draft system so that if you finish last on the ladder, you get first picks next year of all the available talent coming through. Now, one particular club made the selection, number 1 draft pick, grabbed a player, lovely person, and he turned out to be a huge disappointment to the club as they saw it. He was a B personality, and he didn't produce the A-type activities that they were wanting. And they become very disillusioned with him. In the end, they traded him, cost them a lot of money. They were awfully glad to see the end of him. The players, his teammates, were sad to see him go because he's such a lovely person, and they didn't want to see him go. But whose fault was it? Well, it wasn't the player's fault. He was a B personality, that was his profile. And the club picked a B personality and tried to get A-type performance out of them. So it was their fault, really. Have they learnt from it? Probably not, because they probably still don't even know what they've done. Well, if they get hold of this tape, they probably will, but hopefully they can learn from it. Likewise, in an organisation, if you're recruiting and you recruit a B-type person, then that's what you're going to get. You're not going to get an A-type performance out of them. Or you hire a high A, well, expect some mistakes, because that's what's going to come your way. There's a fair bit in it. So for you personally, work out where you are. If you're too much of an A, you can slow down, and maybe you can hurry up a little bit if you're a B. You can make these modifications. It's called role shifting. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is stress. I was doing some work for a major airline in Australia, and I recruited a psychologist, Dr. Robert Kirkby, to run the stress management program. They were wanting some stress in their training we're doing. Now, he was an absolutely brilliant individual. Unfortunately, he's passed away. Otherwise, I'd have him here talking to you. He used to recommend a book, Feeling Good by David D. Burns. It's a very good book, very hard to read, I must warn you. But it goes into stress, goes into cognitive thinking, cognitive distortions, and all that type of thing. Of interest in controlling stress, there's a person out there known as a stress carrier. Now, a stress carrier is not necessarily stress themselves, but pumps stress through to other people. In an organisation, if you've got some individuals pumping a lot of stress around, it can be very debilitating. I'm not going to go into it anymore now because we don't have the time. It's going to take long enough anyway for some of you. But in our 10-week program, we cover stress extensively. Now, if you're a manager of an organisation and you've got some stress carriers in the organisation pumping stress to others, it can be very dangerous. I will tell you one thing. When you travel on air travel, you have to go through security. Quite a lot of the security people are autocratic and also major stress carrier to everybody. So you get a situation where the the passengers go through security, and they're stressed up enough as it is trying to get to the airport through traffic. And by the time they get on the aircraft, they're really wound up. They can create problems for the flight crew. But on the other side of the coin, some of the flight crew can be massive stress carriers in their own right. Now, this is being recorded in 2018, in February. Last year, in 2017, in the United States, there were a couple of instances that I know of, and probably more, where flight crew really wound up some of the passengers, and it turned out to be pretty bad, and it ended up in legal hassles, and the airlines had to pay out some hefty compensation payments because of what some of the cabin crew did. Now, on the other side of the coin, some of the passengers getting on the plane can be really obnoxious to the flight people as well, so they can be stress carriers. So for all of the people who are in the airline, to understand stress and receive training in it is a very wise thing. You don't have to go into it very far, but to understand it. And the big thing is, in their environment, is understanding what a stress carrier is and what they're likely to do and how to diffuse the situation. So just finally, I'll leave stress alone in a minute. Dr. Kirkby and I, we went to a major football club, and they had a major stress problem with the coach. They were on top of the ladder at the time, and we actually had to pull him off the players, and then we taught the players how to put massive stress on the opposition, and they actually went on and won the premiership that year. I've done that with some other clubs in what's called the AFL now. It was the VFL when I did it, and it works a treat. So stress can be used for fantastic things to calm things down, also to create some mayhem. It's a very powerful subject. I really counsel you to do some stress management training, and even buy that book would be a good thing. Now, another problem that organisations have is selling skills. Now, whether you're a student in a school or working in a company or a company employing salespeople, everyone in the whole place needs to know how to sell. For a young person to know how to sell themselves, if they go into an interview situation for a job interview, then they need to sell themselves. So there's some very powerful skills to be learnt, and we cover selling a lot. Also, you may like to purchase a book. It's a very dated book. Before I tell you about this, I want to tell you something. I'm going to be very serious with you. If you are a young person, you've got this silly grading now where you're a baby boomer, or you're a millennial, or I'm not sure all the terms they use. What rubbish. Treat people as people. And if someone is old, you can come across a person who's a stupid old fool, or a silly old woman, or a silly old man. You can come across silly young people too, a lot of silly people. Don't look at a person as being old and how would they know. They've been around a long time, and they can tell you a few things. Accordingly, why I've said that is this book. It's called How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling by Frank Bettger. Now, his spelling for his name, if you want to get the book, is Bettger. Bettger. It's a brilliant book. It's not that much about selling. It's more about life in general, and it's an extremely powerful book, but very old. It was probably written in the 30s or 40s, but I would recommend you get your hands on it. If you're having trouble getting it, send an email to us at Southall Training, and I'll get back to you and tell you where you can get one. But it's hard to get. I'm sorry. The other thing, just quickly, in selling, I also go to companies where things aren't working too well in their sales department. One job I had some years ago, the company had lost $16 million the year before, and things weren't going at all well. And I brought about strategies how to fix that up. I developed a thing called a workbook, and I found that the sales representatives were making only 3 new business sales calls a week. That's all, 3 a week. And so they're no longer with the company. They weren't there for much longer with that type of performance. I recruited new people, and we got them into profit, an $18 million turnaround. It's not hard. one of the great problems in selling, you find people aren't good prospectors. It's an art that has to be taught and learnt. And the other area that is very important is the ability to close a sale. And if you've got a fixed premises where you're selling, say, something like furniture, and you get 7 people in the store for the whole week, or on a numbers game, you'll sell to a certain number of those people, not the whole 7, unless you're selling the stuff really giveaway prices, then you may sell more. But it's if you need to, through advertising or other means, referred leads from others, you need to have that number come up higher. So it's totally a numbers business, but when you do have a prospect there, you need to close them. And I find that when I'm recruiting, that most people coming for sales positions don't know how to close properly, and so I don't hire them accordingly. It's an area where a lot of people really need to do some proper training. There's good training around and some bad training. By the way, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you're about to close someone on a deal, rather than having some canned way of doing it, you need to look at what you're dealing with. So if you're dealing with an amiable, you'll know after doing the profiling that decision making is very difficult. So they're going to procrastinate on you. So you have to tailor your close on a reassurance type basis to reassure the amiable that they're doing the right thing. And the other profiles are different. We cover that in our sales training. So it's quite involved. But that's why it's important to learn profile, that when they come in, as soon as you start to make contact with a person, you're dealing with the profile you're dealing with, because they're unlikely to move any, and you have to learn the skills to move. Now, the next thing we'll look at is staff selection. Now, something that really annoys the heck out of me is staff selection. A lot of organisations, in fact, nearly every one of them, if they want to hire staff, they ask you to send a resume in. Well, I can't tell a person by a resume. I really can't. Most of them are made up wonders, many times done by somebody else for them. I can't tell whether they're an A personality. I can't tell them whether they're an autocrat or an amiable or expressive or analytical. If I'm looking for a position to fill, well, I look at it and I say, well, this position is going to require someone with a lot of analytical ability. So I put an ad in the paper, and so they send the resumes in. Can I tell what they're like by that? No, I can't. So I have them come in by the phone. So I can recognise their profile and other factors about them by their voice box. I do that in our training to teach people how to do that. So accordingly, you then bring the people in who are something like what you want. So the resumes, in my opinion, are terrible. Young people, I don't know the solution for you. If they just insist that that's how it's going to be, there's nothing you can do about it except to send the resume in. The sad thing is that most organisations don't acknowledge they've got the resume or come back and tell the people that they're not interested in them. And chances are the person looking at the resumes don't know what they're doing anyway. It's a mess, isn't it? But that's it. Now, the other big problem, and many of you will have seen this, the person doing the interviewing, if they're middle management and they're not very good, and there's plenty of them out there, if they assess that the person they're interviewing is better than them, the person's virtually got no hope of getting in there. If they're as good as them, once again, not looking good. If they're not as good, well, they've got a fairly good chance. It's rife out there. Now, what I do, I like to do the interview at the organisation with the manager who's there, and if those games are being played, well, I do something about it. Now, therein lies another problem. A lot of people who are involved in personnel companies haven't been in it very long. The staff turnover in that area is massive. It's all about placements, fees. The late Charleston Heston wrote, someone asked him about Hollywood. He said, let me tell you about Hollywood. It's not the money, it's the money. And for personnel people, it's the money of a placement. And so if you've got someone who is not that good and he wants to hire people who've got less talent than him, and that's how it goes down, you get your fee, keep your mouth shut and get on with life. Well, I don't like that, but that's what happens. I have a sheet that I take with me, and I have them fill it in on the applicant while we're doing the interview. It's a handy thing. Now, the next thing that we want to talk to you about is one of the most powerful things that nobody talks about, is voice training. In your makeup, you've got your profile, your A&B personalities, and all sorts of things and skills that you've learnt. But if you're someone who's in a position where you need to sell or whatever, and they say, "Oh, this is really serious," or "This is really great," not good. Good salespeople have learned how to use their voice very well. It's a skill that can be learnt. You'll have a voice box that you gifted with. Some have fantastic voice boxes, and they can then do something even greater with them. But even if a person hasn't got a great voice box, you can develop it and train it. So there's all sorts of training available. Now, as some examples, take some actors. Again, I'm in the area where I'm talking to younger people. I'm going to mention some names that you haven't heard of. Well, don't be silly about this. Because they're old doesn't mean they're terrible or whatever. Some of them are very talented. Now, I'm going to give you some names here. Some you'll have heard of and some you haven't. Russell Crowe. I'm not saying he's a good or bad actor, but I can tell he's done a lot of work on his voice box. Another one is Mel Gibson. Again, has done a lot of work on his voice box. Richard Burton, he's passed away now. He used to be Elizabeth Husband's, one of her many husbands at one stage. Once again, very, very good speech box. If you go to YouTube and type in Richard Burton, all those other people, you'll actually see them and hear what they've done. Now, there's another one, he's once again not with us anymore, James Mason. He spoke very well. He had a particular style different to anyone I've ever heard. Lorne Green was in Bonanza years ago. He was just awesome in his voice box. And once again, he was, I think would have done a lot of training to develop as to what he had. Now, another one who was with him in the movies was Michael Lambden. Now, Michael was in Bonanza with Lorne Green, and then he was in Little House on the Prairie. And then later on in his life, he had a TV series, Highway to Heaven. Now, I was watching on YouTube a version of that just recently, and I was listening to him, and it was obvious to me that he'd done a lot of work on his voice. Now, I went to radio school to be a radio announcer, and I was Lee Murray and a lady called Lorna Forbes for private elocution lessons. Sometimes you'd come across people who'd been to that training, and then you'd hear them say, "Oh, hello, how are you today?" And people go, "Oh, but that's just stupid." So if you've got a very powerful voice, you don't go running around saying, "How are you today? Really good." Just say, "Yeah, I'm very good, thank you." And you'll hear the way Michael Landon speaks. He does it well. But now I want to talk about the best of the best. Oh, two more. Mary Tyler Moore, once again, she spent a lot of effort on her voice box. Worth having a listen to her. She actually talks about how she worked on her speech as a young girl. And finally, Grace Kelly, she won an Academy Award and became Princess Grace. Once again, when she went for her first interview in acting in New York, they marked on her sheet that she presented very well, but the speech was very weak. She went away and did work on it, and she ended up, before she went to Hollywood, working as an actress, doing voice work for radio plays before television. And they used to record everything on acetone discs. So if they were halfway through it, let's say at the 25-minute mark, and someone makes a mistake, well, that's it. They have to throw the whole thing out and start again. So you need to have people around who are going to be a one-take special, and she became one of those. But now I want to tell you about the best I've ever heard. It's really worth going and having a listen to. So if you go to YouTube and type in William, I'll spell the name Lyman. Lyman. He does the narration for that wonderful series Frontline on PBS. I would suspect he had a very good voice anyway, but he's done some special things. I'd like to talk to him one day to find out what he did. I just so in admiration of him. We're running out of time here. Negotiating skills, a skill that you must develop. You're going to go out and negotiate to buy cars and houses and all sorts of things, electrical appliances. By learning negotiation skills, you can save yourself over a period of time thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. Very good skill to develop. Assertiveness skills. Now this is a very important one. People will either come as a very assertive individual or have a weakness in assertiveness. Now if they're too assertive, they need to hold back a bit. On the other hand, if they're weak on assertive, they'll usually have one of three problem areas, if not the whole three. One, they'll feel they'll lack the right to be assertive. Two, they'll lack the skills to be assertive. Or they'll think of an assertive response after the event. So for those people who are weak in assertiveness, well, go away and learn it. Buy books or do courses. It's very valuable for you. But on the other side of the coin, if you're a manager, then you've got someone working for you in your group who is weak on assertiveness, well, then accordingly you can use your skills to get them to come out and talk about how they feel. You can read what's going on. So it's something that I suggest you do some work on. Sorry this is going so long, it's nearly finished. Corporate culture. Now, you've heard of corporate culture pretty well. It was taken from a term called cultural scripting. Now, cultural scripting is, again, psychology. A cultural script is a spoken or unspoken assumption believed by a majority of people in the group, and people live it out. So if you're in amongst a group and you've got an old boy network type there, he says, "Oh, hello, old boy, how's it going?" And they tend to be very snobby, and they just all their chitter-chatter between each other is, "Oh, yeah." So you'll see it in old boy clubs, or they join a club or a golf club. It develops a cultural script, usually quite snobby. Gangs take on scripts, and you're expected to fit in with that gang's cultural script, and they'll put massive pressure on you to join that gang. There's a very good movie, Clint Eastwood, El Torino, I think it's called. A lot of it is about some young people being forced to join the cultural script of some baddies, or I won't say baddies, silly people, and they're expected to drag the person down to their level. It's not good. Schools, you'll find different schools will take on a script. Some of them you have to pay tens of thousands of dollars per year to go to that school, and basically if you're part of that school, well, you can put that on your resume, and if you've been there, that's considered something special. Now, a man called Eric Byrne wrote, he said, "Nearly all human activity is programmed by an ongoing script, often dating from early childhood. It's one of the biggest afflictions of the human race because it makes honesty, awareness and creativity and intimacy possible for only a few fortunate individuals." He had a second quote. Oh, by the way, if someone is following that quote that he just quoted, I just quoted, then it's hopeless. There's nowhere for you to go. But there was a second quote he had. He said, "While it's likely certain individuals will blame their lack of achievement on the culture, it's also likely history is filled with men and women who are themselves autonomous and thoughtful individuals, but who existed within a cultural script environment that would not tolerate them introducing new dramatic possibilities." And so it is. So you may be with an organisation where the cultural script is really bad, and it just holds the company back. They won't go anywhere. Now, I have racing cars and raced for years. My son drives the cars now. I follow Formula One, and each of the Formula One teams have cultural scripts, and they determine the whole chances of success or failure of the team. Now, the script of Mercedes, which is currently the top dog at the moment, is engineering excellence, and they're good at it. And they produce very, very superior cars. And then the drivers are able to then finish the job off. The driver is nearly secondary. Another team that builds very good chassis are the Red Bull team. And they're headed up behind the scenes by a fellow called Adrian Newey. He's got an interesting profile on the A-B set. During the course, I'll probably share that with the people who are doing it. The other team that is interest to me is Ferrari. Now, the Ferrari won't be happy with this, but I believe the cultural script Ferrari for a long time has been living in the past, refusing to bring about change and burying their head in the sand. Now, the head of the Ferrari group is trying to change that cultural script. Well, I wish him all the best. I hope he does. But I think there are too many people in that organisation that live in the past, refusing to bring about change and burying their head in the sand. That's very deeply rooted in the operation. That's my personal view. Now, football teams in Australia, we have mentioned earlier about the AFL. Each of the teams actually have the scripts. One team is Western Suburbs Inferiority Complex. It's pretty well their script, and they keep destroying themselves. They sometimes get up and have a successful period, but they'll go back to where they come from. Another very famous team there is, I won't mention them by name, but those in Australia who follow football will know who I'm talking about, is once like the Ferrari one, living in the past, refusing to bring about change and burying their head in the sand. So it's there. The cultural script is going to determine the chances of success or failure. For those people at school, once again, you need to work out on what your cultural script is. Now, I'm sorry if this is taking so long. For those who, the ones who are not interested will have gone now anyway. I might as well stay with it. Protest suppression. This is very, very, very big and never spoken about hardly at all. If you go to an organisation and you attempt to bring about change, there are people there that will view the change as very intimidatory, and they'll work very hard to stop you. Now, they'll go through two major phases. Number one, they'll try to use indirect intimidation against you to stop. And if you don't cease your shenanigans, they'll move to phase two, which is direct intimidation. Now, phase one, they'll isolate and nullify you, and then when they go to phase two, they'll start defaming you and work for expulsion. Now, you'll see it with football teams all the time, where if they get to the point where, let's say their cultural script isn't right, they're slackers and they're not putting in, and the coach is putting massive pressure on them to perform, sometimes dropping them to the reserve teams and basically demanding perfection out of them, and they don't want to know about it. Some of them get to the point where they'll basically isolate and nullify the coach, start defaming him amongst themselves, and then work for the expulsion. Now, they won't actually sack the coach themselves, but they'll create a situation where the press will get onto it, and they'll start saying, this coach isn't successful, will he last the season out? Probably not. And it builds up where they work towards the expulsion, where in the end the committee of management of the club will then get rid of the player. Now, the players themselves or other people in the place won't want to be caught out with these activities, but that's what happens. And so you'll find that all organisations like churches, schools, sporting groups, companies, this protest suppression is alive and well. It happens a lot. It's never spoken about. We go right into that during our 10-week program. That's for companies. Now, if you're a young student at a school and you're going for it and you're trying to be successful, there's going to be the ratbags around the place who are going to want to try and stop you. They'll spot you trying to do well, and they will then try and stop it. And it's protest suppression. It's part of human nature. It happens all the time. Now, as a recap, I would strongly counsel you to buy books, enroll in courses, learn and develop yourself into someone who can really go for it and do well in life. Now, it may be that you've done a medical degree and you're a young doctor. Well, that's fine, that's good, but you need to know the other things I've just been talking about here. Being able to communicate effectively, have a good voice box, learn the skills, all those things. Understand stress very well, understand cultural scripts, the A and B personality, everything. You need to know all those things. If you're a manager in an organisation, you need to know all those things. So learn them. Now, we can provide them for you. You can get in touch with us at southalltraining.com. The cost of our program, the 10-week program on the webinar, is $500. That's a lot of money to some people, to others, nothing. If you've got an organisation where you've got a major problem, we can come in and fix that for you as well. We also have corporate newsletters which you can have for free. If you want those, send your email to us at Southall Training, and when we release at different times our corporate newsletters, I can supply a copy to you. Your web address will be confidential. We don't sell them to anybody. Just keep it in-house. So there we have it. I'm sorry it's taken so long. I hope it's been of value to you. To the ones who've flipped off early, well, I'm sorry it went so long for you. And for those who've been patient, I hope you've got something from it. Thanks for your time.